Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to Life at Scale. We are joined today by Will Wright, the head of innovation at Protective Life, and Tim von Dadelszen, the head of digital innovation at Partners Life. Thank you both very much for coming to the show. I really appreciate the effort. Let's give the viewers a little bit of your backgrounds for some context. And Tim, let's start with you.
Well, thanks, Michael. Thanks for having us here.
It's my pleasure.
And well done on my surname.
I was going to go with the Von D thing, but I'm like, I'm taking the risk.
Yeah, well, you nailed it. So I've been in the insurance space for my entire career, and I'm older than I look. So it's about 25 years, mostly at the intersection of technology and insurance, although I found my way there over time. So I started out as an advisor, and this is back 25 years ago. And at that time, the internet was really just starting to kind of, you remember that time when it was transitioning from every company had a digital version of their brochure, right? And at this point, things were actually starting to happen online. So we started to kind of experiment with online digital advice delivery, and it grew. We got into startup land.
I find this actually really interesting. When you said 25 years ago, it doesn't seem that long ago, but like 1999 was .com.
Yeah.
Right, so it really defines the age, right? Anyway, please go ahead.
Yeah, so, I started my career about 25 years ago. At that time, it was face-to-face advice, but the internet was starting to kind of bubble up at that time. So every company had a digital version of their paper brochure, but we were looking to try to engage people online at that time, and it was a new thing. Maybe we were ahead of our time, but we were building kind of online fact finders for customers.
I like it.
Advertising on Google AdWords when life insurance as a keyword only cost 5 cents a click,
Right.
the glory days.
Right.
And actually off the back of Google AdWords, you could say we built our first kind of digital startup, a company called Inform, which was online advice. And, this is going back quite a long time. That business over time kind of morphed into Life Direct, which became New Zealand's biggest comparison website, life insurance comparison website, health insurance comparison website. That was a 10-year journey. That was most of what I know about insurance I learned in those kind of, those hard, grinding startup days of building the Life Direct business with my co-founders. And we sold that business in 2013 to a company called TradeMe, which is New Zealand's equivalent of Amazon. And I with my co-founders, we ran that business for a couple of years under TradeMe ownership. It was a lot of fun. It's the first time I worked for a big corporate. Actually, this job here at Partners Life is my second only ever employed gig. So I have, mostly been in the startup land. So that was good. While at TradeMe, we built TradeMe Insurance, which is a fire and general proposition, which is quite a big step. I remember actually going to the TradeMe board to try to convince them to get into insurance, and the founder of that business said, what's next? Trade me bread. It wasn't entirely intuitive to them, but we got there in the end, and that business is going well now. So that's car and home and contents insurance.
So you've really been in the insurance business your whole life.
Yeah, I've been and most of the dark corners I've had a little peek.
Yeah, love it. Well, let's get a little bit of your background as well.
Yeah, Michael, thanks for having me here. So I've been at Protective now for 6 years. I came in as their head of innovation because immediately before that I'd been a pure flight entrepreneur, sort of like Tim. Had started a company in 2013, largely in the health insurance space. Okay. Actually, we were providing health coaching to folks with chronic diseases. Now, in Alabama and the United States, we've got plenty of those. Sold that business and then was sort of looking for the next thing to do. And Protective was looking to be a bit more entrepreneurial. So kind of connected me with that role.
But in a way, you guys have had very similar paths.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Making a move from a startup company, which is just pure entrepreneurship. It's almost like living without a net. Let's be fair. Right? And then moving into a corporate, you said this is your second big company job.
Yeah.
So I kind of did the reverse.
I think most people do the reverse.
I lived inside big corporations my whole life. And then I started my own thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure which is a better path, but I think you guys did the right thing. Can I ask you about this, though? You said you went to the board of TradeMe, and you said you need to be in the insurance business. Can you talk to me about why? And again, this gets back, we'll talk about innovation in a little bit per se, But why did you say it to them, and what was their response?
Well, the why was just because it seemed quite obvious to...
Yeah, but what was the obvious part? Because to you it's obvious, but to them it wasn't.
Imagine, Trade Me like Amazon.
Yep.
They have Trade Me Jobs, Trade Me Motors, Trade Me Property, right?
Yep.
We know the triggers for insurance. It's typically buying your first home or having a child.
Yep.
So if someone's adding a pram to their watch list on Trade Me, and they've never done that before,
right.
Maybe someone in the household is pregnant.
Right.
So there was just that kind of network effect. We were just trying to kind of make 1 + 1 = 3, and it seemed obvious to us that it's so darn hard to sell life insurance products.
Right.
The trick is to be in the moment when that life trigger happens,
yep.
and Trade Me was right there in the moment for so many of those trigger points. So that was the argument, and that eventually got us across the line with it.
And were they initially into it as well, or were they just like, we don't understand how this works?
Oh, I had a few, it's hawks and doves, I think they call it.
Like it.
Yeah, we had a few people who were behind the concept from the early stage. Something that helped a lot is we did it in partnership with a large fire and general insurer in New Zealand.
Yep.
And for them, they were trying to be seen as, a digital leader, and partnering with Trade Me was like the ultimate as far as the kind of the halo effect.
I love it.
And so, we put a good deal together with that business to formulate a hard to refuse proposition.
Yeah, I love it. Whenever I see a big platform business that doesn't have insurance associated with it, I almost feel like I have to recommend to them, because you're missing a whole bunch of revenue, but also missing a whole bunch of, like you said, triggers to actually help people.
Yeah, it was kind of embedded insurance before anyone gave it a name.
Exactly. So let's talk about this. What could insurance look like if you could just greenfields it, right, in its most ideal configuration?
Yeah, I'll take that, and then Tim, I'd love to hear your
please.
thoughts. It's interesting. So I've been getting into insurance more from the kind of the opportunity it has to help people live longer and better lives. If you think about kind of what insurance does for just the world, it actually helps signal where there's risks, and that signal is oftentimes it's a financial signal. And it's sending that signal to whoever is taking that risk that maybe you shouldn't do that, right? I always joke, but if it's on a life insurance underwriting exam, you probably shouldn't be doing it. So you don't want to be deep sea scuba diving. You don't want to be a private pilot. That seems to be a really bad thing. So I think though that that power of taking basically experience data, right? So lots and lots of data, and using that to help individuals make better choices, I think is where the sort of ideal of insurance needs to exist. And then I think the other piece, though, is also, too many people are either underinsured or overinsured, largely because it's not because they don't want to protect themselves against risk. It's oftentimes because we insurance companies just make buying products too confusing.
Yeah.
And so to me, I think if you were to sort of idealize insurance, life insurance, for instance, we should create much more kind of automated products that are much more dynamic, that change essentially as your risk changes, and make it something that it's almost like, Google Maps, right? It just gives you kind of a co-pilot that says this is the best way to get to where you're going, and trust us, with those directions.
But then you're suggesting that there should be this kind of high-level platform that takes all this data in, understands all of your policies, actually may tell you at some point, you don't need this one because you have this one which already includes that in a better format. And also then says, like you said, there's a trigger. If you're buying a pram, maybe you're pregnant, knows that too. You give it access to that. And then it says, well, maybe you should add this and subtract that because of all these things. And then maybe you should start a college fund. Like, it should do all of these things for you. That's where the AI part comes in. What do you think?
Well, we were talking about this yesterday, but the right person with the right product at the right time is everything at claim time. So the little thought experiment that we talked about was, choose at random a policy holder on your book of business and imagine that they have a claim today. What's the likelihood that that claim payment is going to meet their current family's needs? Very, very low. And that's because of everything that Will's just talked about. The little kind of useful way of thinking about the process issues that we have within our business is to pat ourselves on the back for having good product at the right price. You got the 3P problem. You've got product, price, and process, and you're only allowed to choose two. In our market, we've chosen high quality product at a price that represents the quality of the product. But it's full advice, long fact finding forms. It's full underwriting, long paper, well, not paper, thankfully, but still long questionnaires. And so it's the process that really takes the hit. And so to come back to your question, for me, it's, are there themes and things going on in the technology landscape at the moment that would allow us to have all 3Ps?
Right.
So let's try to fix the process issue.
But are there?
Well, there's, and in the New Zealand market there are. So finally it looks like real-time access to digital health records is starting to be a thing. So that really helps. A lot of investment into underwriting rules engines. And so you add underwriting rules engine with real-time instant access to medical records, perhaps sprinkle on a bit of AI on the top to kind of make more sense of those records. Yep. And you've really reinvented that barrier, which is that long application form.
What do you think?
Well, I love the 3P framework.
I love it too.
I think what keeps me sort of in the game and excited about this is that problem that you articulated, which is at claim time, everyone is essentially overinsured or underinsured, and that's that creates a lot of distrust also from a consumer standpoint, because a lot of people complain about the fees that we charge. The policies are sort of oftentimes sold to people that don't necessarily need them, but because some advisor needs to pay for their boat, in the terrible situation. But I think that, from an insurance company standpoint, the social mission that we provide, is, striving for that, where we could say to someone, you just come to us and we'll take care of you, I think is a tremendous statement that we try to live into. And I think that this sort of future vision of this, I think would be, a great way to make it real.
I want to make the case that there are a lot of other industries that do the same thing that you're talking about and not as well, right? So think about the car companies, at least up until today. Most people who have a car don't know if there's enough air in the tires. They don't know if the carburetor is going to break down. They don't know if the engine has enough oil. They don't know any of these things. But now that you put all these sensors into the car, you could probably go home and now plug it into an application and every day see, not in real time per se, what's the status of my car? Do I need to bring it in, right? And that's what you're talking about. But I do want to ask you this then, because if there's an ideal out there, and I can't believe we're still on the first question, but if there's an ideal out there, is there a reference industry that you see and you think, can we be more like that?
I mean, I point to, and oftentimes in innovation circles, we oftentimes point to these technology companies.
Go ahead.
But so I say that with a little bit of care, but I do think that something like Google Maps is an industry leader that we could aspire to, and that's one example. But the sort of recommendation engines that exist with the Netflix of the world, or the Googles, where you could go in and say, I want to get from point A to point B. I think with the insurance industry, we're still like, well, here's a map. Right. Oh, and by the way, here's also a person who's going to show you how to use the map.
Right. And not on Saturdays kind of thing.
Right.
Right.
Google Maps is sort of like, well, you can, if you want to walk, here's the distance on walking. If you want to hire an Uber, you can do that. If you want to drive, here's how you do it. If you want to take the train, I think we could be better at that. And that's kind of, and then on top of that, at least in the States, when you are using Google Maps and there's an accident, for instance, they will reroute you.
Right.
And so I do think that can be pretty inspiring.
It's a great example.
Great analogy. I can't think of a better analogy. I do think that it's up to us to fix our own problems, because we're the only ones that know how extraordinarily complex the whole insurance buying process is. It's so common to see outsiders look at us and say, why are they not doing it better? There's often very good reasons.
Right.
A fancy and pretty front end is not the solution to our industry, which is what most insurtechs think they can bring to.
It's the easiest win, though, right?
Yeah,
but it doesn't.
It doesn't
Yeah, it
fix
doesn't.
underlying.
Yeah.
It's a grudge purchase with customers that are entirely not engaged. The value exchange is slow, usually non-existent, hopefully non-existent, which is the irony if there's no claim.
Right.
So, yeah, there's some really weird and wonderful things about our industry, which makes it a bit dangerous to look outside for answers.
But actually, we were talking about this before we started recording. I want to make another analogy and see what you think. Remember how we were talking about my flight to over Alaska? And I was like, yeah, we had to land there just to do an emergency landing. And you pointed out just how complex it is. Yeah. People just think, I buy a ticket, I get on the plane, I land in Tokyo. Right? But they do. And when it doesn't work exactly like that, they just think, how come they can't get this right? They don't even understand like how to build the airplane. One of the things I love to say is, if you took every modern convenience away from humans, how long would it take to get back here? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Forever, because you don't know how to build a plane. I don't know how to build a car. Like, I don't know how to do any of this stuff. Anyway, so that's the way I like to think about it. So very complex.
It is. It's and it's very complex, and also we as consumers in the modern age have, reset on all these expectations.
Sure.
I mean, if the internet goes out on a plane that you're flying in this magical tube from Atlanta to Japan, and then the internet goes out and you throw up your hands and you're like, F this.
I mean, despite the fact that you're sitting at 39,000 feet in a chair in the air, that's not good enough.
The lovely person who's bringing you a glass of wine if you need it.
How do people live like this?
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do this. I think we've established that innovation's important. And if we've established that it's imperative, how do leaders like you guys create an environment in which risk-taking and failure are really acceptable? Because you both know from your startup experience, you have a killer idea, you implement that idea, and everybody just shrugs. They're just like, really? I don't need that, right? But you're allowed to do that in your own companies. So how do you foster this environment where people below you or around you just think, I think I'm going to try this? And if it doesn't work exactly the way I want to, I can iterate on it, yeah? How do you do that?
I mean, the first thing is that it's hard. In smaller businesses, it just happens more organically. You have 10 people who are building a business and they are talking to each other all the time.
Right.
They're, wearing all hats. And so innovation kind of becomes just part of the necessity of working life. I've found working for bigger companies that it's always about leadership. Our founding CEO would always use the word bravery, which is a really interesting term, because if you think of the word bravery, if a CEO is telling you to be brave, then there's a lot in that.
Yeah.
That means that they're telling you that they trust you.
Right.
And they're also telling you to not accept the status quo and always look for better ways of working.
Yep.
So I do think leadership is a huge point. The other thing is that it depends what we mean by innovation, because there's the temptation to think of great big new ideas. That's the glory stuff. But innovation on a day-to-day, across the entire organization might just be working out a way to send an email better, or whatever it might be. And so I think that most people in our organization, partly because actually one of our core values is always restless. So that's nice to have it as a core value within our business.
Always restless.
Restless.
Yeah.
Always restless.
Great.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so don't ever be satisfied.
So it needs to be in the DNA of the businesses.
It's interesting. I mean, I think it does very much depend on leadership. I think what's challenging is, for Protective at least, we're 115, 120-year-old company. So our founding CEO is long gone. And so we've had a number of excellent CEOs since then who have grown the business in many ways. But it takes a very different skill set to sort of start something from zero.
Yeah, at that size, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's also the issue that when you get to scale, life at scale, we're talking about this, it's, innovation needs to be much bigger to move the needle. So we, talking about kind of when you have a profit margin of $0 as a startup and you get to $1 of profit, life is great. And you start doing, laps around the building, fireworks go off.
High-fiving people.
Right. When you have $100 million of profit and you generate an incremental dollar, people go, so what have you done for me lately? So I do think there's some fundamental challenges to your point. But you're right. The key for people I've seen, at least in my role, is about reframing risk taking. It's important to almost apply cognitive behavioral therapy, where you say, I think a lot of people in large organizations believe that just doing the same thing over and over again is the safe path. And what we try to say, or at least what I try to coach folks on, is that, look, the world is changing. You always need to be kind of trying new things. Now, you don't do it all the time, but it's important to do that because that is actually the lower risk path. In my opinion, actually, being innovative, trying new things is the lower risk path in life.
Yeah, I love that.
Because you end up being highly at risk if you don't try new things, of ending up without, kind of walking off a cliff, because you haven't really questioned, where you're headed.
Yeah. And if you're always stuck in this path of doing the same thing, when the rest of the world is innovating, even at a small scale, you're going to lose at some level, yeah?
Oh, nothing more frightening than to be tinkering with an idea but not making any progress and then look over your shoulder and see that one of your competitors is doing the same
Right,
thing.
and you're like, that was my idea.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter, right?
It doesn't matter.
So you bring, and again, I just want to get back to this a little bit, and I want to understand what the challenges are here. But both of you come up from startups, right? And the mentality inside, like you said, a small company is different than a mentality in a big company. I'm not making a value judgment. But how do you take the best things about working in this really small company and bring them into a big company without kind of running over the wrong people, if that makes sense, or the wrong ideas? Because that's a challenge,
Tim,
right?
do you want to?
Well, I'm not sure if it answers the question, but one thing I've noticed that I've pushed back against working for a large organization is just around how we run projects. And so, in my startup life, it was always about the quality of the output. And the cost and time thing was just a given because you didn't have much to spend and you didn't have much time to do anything. So quality, cost, and time were, the three pillars, and you work to that. With the large organizations, my observation is that you spend a lot of money on really good project managers, and you put steering committees together. And then people who are in steering committees, quite understandably, want to have levers that they can pull in order to show that they are steering this project. And the two most obvious levers are budget and time, right? So let's pull back on the budget and let's move faster. And the quality lever just doesn't exist for steering committees. So I often notice that, the way that we run projects is important. We need to be much more deliberate about, I have no doubt whatsoever that we can deliver a project on time and on budget, but is it going to meet the customer needs at the end of the day? That's the thing that really needs the focus.
Right. So you mentioned two of these, right? Cost and time are the two levers, right? But the output has to be still important. I guess the real question for me is, how do you get out of that mindset that the quality is the most important thing?
Well, I love your comments, Tim.
Yeah, it's really
on. I do think that you can kind of scale a startup mentality, particularly if you have that focus on the quality of the output. But it takes a level of intentionality that is really hard to get right. You have to build in processes. You have to build in kind of leadership principles. You have to build in, you have to fundamentally build into your technology stack, the ability to collect data. And I think that a lot of large existing organizations just haven't done that with the right level of intentionality. And so, unfortunately, to your point, and that's sort of the big knock on big corporate America, or corporate New Zealand, it sounds like, oftentimes corporate America kind of delivers stuff that's very mediocre. And I think that's what we're trying to, inoculate against, or kind of help to change. Yeah.
That risk of failure, so obviously both our companies are part of the Daiichi Life Group.
Yep.
I'm sure you're aware, Michael, but we run an innovation fund program.
Let's talk about it. I really want to talk about it.
I mean, because it is on point with your question, because that concept of deliberately allowing space for failure to not be
and paying for it.
Yeah, and paying for it.
So go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to explain what it is.
Okay. So the innovation fund is divided up into two parts.
Go ahead.
You've got what's called a pre-seed fund, which is $100K US. And typically the concept is that you deliver a proof of concept within 3-month period. But the barrier to entry on that funding is, well, I would argue low. I mean, it's a couple of page application form and a value proposition.
Really? Where do I apply? I'm kidding.
So that's the pre-seed fund. The seed fund is $500,000 US. Again, it's an application process which is not particularly onerous, but then there's a pitch type process.
Right.
Not at all Dragon's Denny. But there's a pitch process for that. The criteria around the funding is, well, it's actually fairly loose, but obviously Dadelszen Life is looking for, to support ideas that don't just support our business in New Zealand,
Right.
but have some kind of possibility rolled out across the group. So it's one of the key criteria.
Yeah.
And I think to this point, that's one example of being very intentional about how do you build in kind of risk-taking, but also a process to, frankly, focus on quality.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that is intentionally built into the application process is this question of, have you talked to customers? Have you done mock-ups? Have
Right.
you actually thought about the quality of the output?
Yeah, they've systemized the whole thing,
Right.
which means on a kind of a application to application level across your entire business, people don't need to put too much thought into that's the bit that's done really well, is that if you systemize it, then the cognitive load has gone away, and
Yeah.
actually that kind of concept of a conveyor belt, to come back to that.
Yep.
We now have a conveyor belt where you can put your idea on it and push
That's
it
right.
through.
One of the things that you talk about, sort of that quality lever, that I think entrepreneurs do really well, successful ones at least, is they really think about problem solving or problem hunting,
Right.
really. So you got to go find a problem that a customer has so that they're willing to pay for it.
It's so much fun to do anyway. Go ahead.
Super
Yeah.
fun. And solving problems at scale is where the real fun of being a sort of startup founder is. I think building that into this application through the Dadelszen Life Fund has actually been really healthy, because it signals to everyone that you've got to start with a customer problem,
Right.
and solving that problem at some level of quality is ultimately what we're trying to encourage.
I don't know how you guys do it, but we've put up all of the innovation funding documentation across our company wiki. And so actually, you could, the ideas are not just coming out of innovation people or technology people. And I think that's important, because you're talking about problems to solve. Well, there's no one that knows the problems of our businesses than the people that are at the absolute coalface of the...
Yeah, the frontline people that are dealing with it every day. So I taught an innovation class at one of the universities in Thailand, and they were like, but how do you come up with an idea? Right? And I want you to both comment on this. And one of the things that I said, and it's not a fully formed thought, was, is there anything in your life where on a day-to-day basis you think, I wish somebody would fix this, and that it could earn you money? That's your idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At some level, no?
Yeah, I think you need to know something about the world that other people don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and if you spend 20 years in the insurance industry, poking around in all the dark corners, as I said before, you end up seeing a lot of those opportunities. But there's a big difference between being an ideas people, we've got lots of ideas people, and being a creative person.
Yeah.
I think it's a good distinction to make, because, a creative person, within the word you have the concept of actually doing the thing, building the thing. So no shortage of good ideas. We just got to get them on the conveyor belt.
How long has this been around?
The fund has been around probably 4 years in various forms. It has evolved a fair bit, and it was, originally the brainchild of an executive at Daiichi, Teramoto-san. To his credit, he went bigger than I think anyone really wanted to go at the time, which is excellent. Still, it's only $5 million total USD, but it's this great catalyst. The other nice thing about it too is, to your point about coming up with creative ideas and sort of finding problems, I've also noticed that by creating a deadline, you have to have a deadline to find a problem.
Right.
It actually forces some folks to actually sharpen their pencils and think a bit harder on what problems am I trying to solve for individuals.
Remember we were talking earlier about this idea of very difficult to say no, and in different cultures it's hard to say, like, you can't push back, right? Has this incentivized people? Because if you live in that kind of culture, right, presenting an idea is unfulfilling if you're not sure if it's a yes or a no. But in this case, there's a fund. There's money at the end of that question to say it's either a yes or no, because you either get the funding or you don't, right? So it's pretty binary. Has it encouraged people in a way that you think is different, as a different incentive for people to actually, who had ideas that were creative, that could be executed, to actually come forward and say, I'm doing this thing now? Do you feel that change in the past 4 or so years?
Oh, yeah. So I'll give you an example. I mean, we did a project that one of our SVPs had been sitting on for a decade.
Oh, wow.
And essentially the project was, and it's very simple, but when people come to buy life insurance, they don't know how much life insurance they actually need. So they oftentimes just sort of pick a number. It's very much just sort of like everyone else is buying this, so I think I'll get this. When we underwrite you, though, we'll actually underwrite you up to a range of coverage. So you might be underwritten to buy $1 million of coverage, but you asked for $500,000. Well, in the past, we weren't telling you that you could buy more. So it's sort of like, the Super Size Me project in in McDonald's. You walk in and you say like, well, for a few dollars more, you can get a little bit, a bigger drink. Obviously, that made a lot of money for McDonald's. They wouldn't be doing it. One project that we validated, tested, sort of put together all the digital experience around that. That was a decade. That idea had been sitting in someone's head for a decade, and because the fund existed, now you could kind of extract that and put that forward. That's one example, and I do think it gets down to this process of like, if you actually do the work, kind of put in the. People in athletics talk about the process a lot. Like if you want to get good at soccer, wake up every day and
start kicking balls.
Kick 100 balls into a net.
Yep.
I do think sort of innovation, entrepreneurship, these kind of activities are very much similar. There's a process involved.
Yeah.
And you have to get up every day and do it. Most of the time it's not going to work. That's fine.
Right.
It's the activity of saying, okay, what's the problem that I'm going to solve today? Okay, let's try it. Let's think if that's enough. And keep moving.
Yeah, I think there's an external misconception that innovation is just sitting around going, I got it. Right. I just had an idea. This is the idea to end all ideas. And that it's not this just continuous, because you said this before, if you're not doing continuous small little processes around innovating and changing, you're never going to get to the big idea.
And how common is it that the big idea isn't the idea that you started out with as well?
Oh my God, always.
Yeah.
Oh, you both know this from starting your own companies. You're like, we got it. The four of us are going to build this thing. And then you start building and building. You're like, that's not working, but this will work. But you have to be kind of in it to win it. I hate to say it in that way, but we talk about this a lot internally. You have to be in business. And once you're in business, and if you can survive even just a little longer than you expected, all these other little things will come to you. You go to a client and say, please buy this thing. And they'll go, we don't want that, but can you do this? Right. And then you're like, yeah, we can. And then another client goes, we want that too. And then you're off to the races. And I think it's the same thing, this continuous conveyor belt of innovation, I think leads to those things. Can I ask you guys this, though? You're in New Zealand. You're in Alabama, right?
They're the same.
Even if they were the same, you're still on the other side of the planet. And as great as communication tools have become, talking to someone in a different time zone, or communicating, I think would be the better word, is hard. Again, this gets back to leadership a little bit, but how do you ensure that the great ideas that come out of New Zealand filter into Alabama and vice versa? I mean, that's one of the great things about being a uniquely international company, is that you may have an idea that's perfect for New Zealand and vice versa. How do you do that?
Well, it's something that we're actively working on at the moment. I mean, we're both here in Japan at an innovation forum surrounded by our peers from across the globe.
Can't do it enough, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I agree. I wouldn't mind traveling around and spending more time with Will. That would be nice.
Love to go to Alabama.
Yeah.
I'd love to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it gets back to intentionality. That word really matters. It is easier when you have things like email and phones and Zoom and Teams and whatnot. But it's still not the same as being in a room, because oftentimes the conversations that happen as you're boarding the bus or as you're as you're waiting to get a beer at the izakaya is where those ideas come from.
Yep.
But you also have to have humility, right? So I do know that there's a lot of conversations we have where it's like, how does that work in New Zealand? Because in the United States it's different,
right.
And those nuances matter. So there's a bit of humility also that I've developed, which is, I believe that I'm a capable person.
Right.
But I don't think I can solve all the world's problems.
Yeah, I mean, but we had a big old session yesterday and we were talking about initiatives that we're each working on, and the amount of overlap was quite staggering.
Surely.
So we are trying to convince people that don't think that they need life insurance to buy life insurance. And we're trying to reduce the cost to do that. And so some of the fundamental issues are still some of the issues that have, been keeping us busy our entire careers. So,
Okay. Two more things. and this one's maybe just for me, but what role do you think emerging technologies play, like AI or even distributed ledger technology, play in this innovation path that you're talking about?
How much time do you got?
Plenty.
So, Tim, I love your thoughts. But we have done some deep dives into both AI as well as distributed ledger technology. You bring those two up. I think ultimately technology has the opportunity to kind of fundamentally allow you to transform how you deliver the same solution to a customer, which I think is the right way to frame things. By which I mean, the customer need, in my observation, the human need doesn't really change. If you think about it, human beings haven't really evolved much since we started talking to each other in the sort of the farmlands of ancient Sumeria. But we've sort of since the dawn of time have basically wanted the same things. The technology allows you to deliver those better, faster, cheaper, and so I think that's where emerging technologies get exciting. I think what I've learned is to be a bit skeptical about people that lead with the technology as opposed to the human solution, because oftentimes you'll end up, and I think this is true for distributed ledger technology to date, you'll end up with just sort of, we're just doing X on the blockchain,
Right.
and it's like,
Yeah,
but
but
X is not making things better.
Right, doesn't help anybody.
And I don't mean to disparage any kind
No,
of
no, I get
Bitcoin
it.
users, but it's like, have you ever used Bitcoin to buy a coffee? It's like much harder. you know?
Well, you
So-
wouldn't do it because it's all speculative. We can talk about that later. But yeah,
But you know what I mean. So
completely.
I kind of, but I'm a big believer also in like using the technology to inform how it might solve your problem.
Absolutely.
AI is a great example. Like, I think it can solve some tremendous problems, but you've got to actually sort of use it and see if it works. So
Yeah, you can't sit on the sideline and just comment about
Talk
it.
about it,
Yeah.
right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, doubling down on what Will said, I mean, the number, I mean, I think life insurance or the insurance industry has been identified as the hotbed for use cases for AI, and yet I don't really see anything at the moment going on that's really changing or moving the needle.
Right.
So I do think that you can't start with the technology, as Will said. It's the whole concept of where is the problem? It's a solution. Looking for a problem.
Yeah.
And you see it everywhere. And the other thing about it is that it's used as a piece of technology, whereas actually I see it as part of a solution or embedded piece of a solution. So there are lots of examples where in our business, actually, talking about the innovation conveyor belt, where every person in the business has an AI concept, with very little understanding of how it's going to work or how it's going to make any positive difference.
Right.
So yeah, there's a bit of I think at the moment, the hype cycle, we're slightly over the top of the mountain, and people are starting to be a little bit more pragmatic around how we can actually get value out of it.
Spent a lot of time talking about the Gartner hype cycle. Okay, one last thing, and then I'll let you both go. You both now are working for traditional insurers. Why are they best positioned to own this future?
I'll provide thoughts, and you want to start?
Oh, I don't mind starting. I think we've covered off a lot of this.
But let's just succinctly.
Yeah, well, I would say that I repeat my comments about the fact that our industry is very unique and our customers are very unique, and it's people that have spent a long time in the industry that typically have understood that uniqueness by, as I keep saying, spending enough time in the dark corners, working out why things do or don't work, or why things work the way they do and can be changed. And so when I'm quite well plugged into the startup scene in New Zealand, on the leadership team for the InsurTech New Zealand. I love the idea of InsurTechs coming in and adding value, but just so often, they come in with, it's usually underestimating a couple of things. Underestimating the cost of customer acquisition is a big one. Have no idea how difficult it is to get a person to engage. So that's expensive. The other thing is, and I mentioned it before, fixing, such a low engagement, low frequency category. So actually fixing the CX, which is, I'm so passionate about fixing the CX and the UX, but doing that alone is just not enough, because you're only engaging with it once a year anyway, at best. So how good does the CX and the digital experience actually need to be? Again, I think that we're best placed because we understand our customers better than anyone else does.
Yeah. I think in the U.S. it's echo a lot of those themes, and I've seen a lot of insurtechs come in with a very brash attitude, recognizing that, yes, I think insurance as a category is something that people wish that they didn't have to buy. It's fun. It's nice to be able to go to sleep at night with a sort of sense of peace of mind that we provide, but for the vast majority of insurance, you spend a lot of money on it and never use it, which is good. That's important. But I think people don't appreciate. Many people are like, I'd rather keep the $50 or $100 in my pocket this month.
Unless something goes wrong.
Correct.
It's good they don't use it. It's not good that if you ask them to articulate the connection between the premium they pay and the value that they're supposed to be getting in return, they do a terrible job of that articulation. So there's something a little bit fundamentally wrong if you're paying for something that you don't actually or can't explain what the value is.
Yeah, and I think that there's high barriers to entry in the U.S. at least. Regulatory barriers. It's very capital intensive. You have to have a lot of existing capital. So I do think it's almost our duty to kind of fix ourselves as an industry. Not to say that some brash upstart, Elon Musk will sort of show up and revolutionize it. I don't think that's really the concern that we're faced with. But I do think as an industry, we may have strayed away from our social mission, to your point, and fixing the articulation that customers have between why they're buying this product and the value that it creates, being more transparent on fees, and then also, frankly, getting back to that original point, which is we could do a better job at proactively covering the risks that we know you have without you having to ask for it. And I think that those things are just low-hanging fruit almost for traditional companies like ourselves, and we're working on them, which is very exciting.
Just to kind of contradict some of my earlier statements, I do think one thing that's interesting is that we don't talk much about is changing customer behaviour and generational changes and what the impact on our industry is going to be, and how well configured we are as the incumbents to deal with that. By 2030, I think about 75% of the workforce is going to be Gen X and Gen Z.
Right. And
Gen Z, these are people that have just grown up expecting instant access to information, cell phone in the pocket.
Right.
So how well positioned we are, and are we kind of reconfiguring for that is super interesting. I saw just to give you a flavour of it, there's I don't know anything about them, but there's a US startup. I think it's a money management app called Clio, I think it is, and they're clearly focused on Gen Z. And I'm not saying we'd do this, but they have a roast mode and a hype mode. So it picks up the fact that you've been to McDonald's 12 times in the last month, and it's roasting you and saying, I'm going to turn that into a bill payment if you keep doing that, right? Or a hype mode where it sees that you haven't been going out much, and it pats you on the back for being a terrific little introvert. So I mean, I think it's thought provoking because you compare that to our current, and I'm not saying that we need to do that.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to see serious financial services business so focused on that new market, and so I do worry that we are not gearing up for that change.
There's a company in Australia called Peachy trying to do the same thing. Okay, guys. Will Wright, the head of innovation at Protective Life. Tim von Dadelszen, the head of digital innovation at Partners Life. That was awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate
both
the
very
opportunity.
Thanks, Michael. Cheers.